Today on CityCast Denver. We live in confusing times, and it feels like every day there's some new big policy proposal promising to reshape our city and our state. Should we raise taxes on the rich? What about retaliatory redistricting? And why exactly do our Excel bills keep going up? The longtime dean of CU Denver's School of Public Affairs, Paul Teske, joins me today to explain what's really at stake and what you need to know. Plus, stick around for a sponsored segment with real estate agent Elizabeth Martinez, who is on to talk with me about one of both of our favorite neighborhoods. Today is Thursday, February 19th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Paul Teske, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So there's a few pretty complicated policy questions facing Coloradans related to taxes and power, and it's all really important, but it's kind of hard to understand. So I would love to start with this ballot measure. It's an income tax proposal. Liberal groups want to see a measure on the 2026 ballot that would increase taxes for folks making more than $506,000 a year and decrease taxes for folks making under that. What are they hoping to do or fund with this tax change?
So they're hoping to change from a flat tax, which is required by Tabor. Tabor, of course, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that was passed in 1992. About half the states have a graduated income tax, so it's not a, crazy idea. But the idea would be to tap into the wealth of the people over 500,000 to have them pay more and raise potentially maybe $3 billion. And that would be used, I believe it said, for K-12 education, healthcare, and other children's programs at the state level. So it would be extra money, but raised mostly from wealthier people. So I think they're hoping that the politics of that are good, because most people would see not much of a change at all, or, as you said, a slight decrease. But only the very wealthy would pay more.
So you mentioned Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and a change in taxes here in Colorado means a change to the state constitution related to Tabor,
Yes.
which isn't just as simple as passing a new measure. What has to happen for this to pass? And what is Tabor? Can you put Tabor into that picture?
No, that's a great question. Tabor passed in 1992 on the fourth try, and it is the most restrictive so-called tax and expenditure limitation, or TEL, in the country. It makes us, Colorado, the only state in the country where the legislature can't raise taxes. So it has to go to a vote of the people. There have been a few votes over the 34 years since Tabor for some general tax increases, and they have not succeeded. Some sin taxes have succeeded, like tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, gambling, kinds of things, which, I think people feel maybe should be taxed, so people will do less of them. So Tabor's, really restrictive. I mean, we are a top 10 state by income in Colorado now, but we are in the bottom 10 of state spending per capita. Probably not all of that is due to Tabor. We were never a super high spending state, but I would argue, and I believe, a lot of that is due to the restraints and constraints of Tabor over the years. And I also feel, there was a recent report from the Urban Institute that looked at state income growth over the last 50 years, and we were the second highest growing state in that period. But also going back to 1970, we were the 30th per median household income. We're now the 9th in the country, and I'm not sure people have really absorbed in Colorado that we're a state more like Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, California than we are Mississippi, Alabama. But we spend more like Mississippi, Alabama, in part because of Tabor.
Interesting. And so, again, because of this part of our Constitution of Tabor, a new measure like this that's changing the income taxes has bigger, has to jump through more hoops or more ramifications for passing it. What does that look like versus something else that'll be on the ballot this year? Some other measure that doesn't touch the Constitution?
Yeah. The there's a title board in Colorado that um, sets the rules for what gets on the ballot and how. And there's something also called the single subject rule, which is a ballot initiative should be about mainly one thing. And there's some flexibility in terms of what that means. And the single subject rule, interestingly, was passed in 1994 after Tabor, because Tabor is actually about 8 to 10 different things. It's the flat income tax. There's a reserve requirement. There's the main Tabor thing, which is that state government can't grow by more than the combination of population growth plus inflation. And then you have to give the money back to the taxpayers if it does grow more than that, if the economy's doing well. Tabor also, yeah, it has the literally the language of how you ask for a tax increase with all in caps. It says, shall taxes be increased by uh, $3 billion or whatever to do whatever. So it's framed. It was very carefully thought through by the supporters of Tabor, and it's been honestly very effective. So to get a initiative on the ballot for this fall, the proponents had to argue that it was one thing. The opponents, and there are some who may actually challenge this at the Colorado Supreme Court level. The title board, in my understanding, has approved this maybe last week or 2 weeks ago as a single subject. But basically, you're saying we're going to change the income tax from 4.4 to this graduated set of tax rates, and we're going to let the state keep the money, the 3 billion or so that it would raise. And so the opponents are arguing that's at least two things. The proponents are saying, well, no, it's a change in the income tax, and we keep the money. So uh, that's one of the challenges with Tabor that has made it so constraining, is that it is so many things all at once built into, and opponents of Tabor have had to figure out interesting legal and other ways to try to get around it.
And so you were talking about opposition to this particular ballot measure.
Right.
Who is that opposition? I mean, I'm thinking like rich people could just say
Yeah.
launch an
Yeah.
opposition campaign because they'll be most affected. But
Right. And I think on
who
that
is it?
front, there'd be some arguments of, well, rich people will leave if you try to tax them at a higher rate. And uh, yes and no. I mean, I think there's some evidence for that, but there's some evidence in high tax states like New York and California that rich people don't leave because of the taxes. And it's, I think one example of the in the ballot proposal itself is that if you're in the $2 to $5 million range, or maybe it was 1 to 5, and remember that's income, right? That's like you're making a lot of money.
Yeah.
You now pay 41,000 on average in state taxes. This change would make you pay 56,000. So for $15,000, are you really going to move from Aspen to somewhere else? I mean, I don't know, maybe, but I tend to doubt it. So there's that. But the opponents, so the Independence Institute, conservative group, has always been very pro Tabor. There's a group called Americans for Prosperity, and they Michael Fields heads that group. I may have the name slightly wrong, but they at the same time in recent years have been proposing small cuts in the income tax. I believe they may be proposing even this fall for a vote from 4.4 to 4.3, and they've been successful the last couple of years with a couple of those changes. I think people feel like, oh, it's a cut, it's not much, and why not vote for it? So they're definitely opponents to this. There's also, I'd say, conservatives nationwide see Tabor in Colorado as a win that they want to maintain, and not have changed. So there's money behind the opposition for sure.
And I just want to mention Advance Colorado is Michael Fields' group. People say as a truism that Tabor is popular. Do you think it's actually popular, or do you think certain pieces of it are popular?
Yeah, I think it is somewhat popular in part because of the refunds, which a couple of years ago were like $750, and of course people like to get money back. I think what people miss is that we are a rich state that spends not very much, and that people, depending on what they believe about the size of government, have different feelings about that. But it has some very direct impact. So I mean, to me, there's no question that Tabor constraints have driven up the cost of tuition for higher ed in Colorado. So if you have kids and you send them to higher ed in Colorado, you're paying more. There's an interesting study of automobile maintenance that says that Coloradans pay almost 1,000 more than the national average every year in maintaining their car. And I'd say it's because we have not the greatest road repair. And that's because our gasoline tax that goes to road repair has been 22 cents, I believe, since 1990. And to change that would require a vote under Tabor, and that is not going to happen. So there's ways people don't see that Tabor costs them money, and just the general low state spending. But the popularity of, I think, is a combination of the refunds that people have seen, which they're not going to see, by the way, in the next couple of years because the Tabor surplus is no longer there. But also maybe for some a sense that it constrains state spending and they get to vote on things. But I think it's harder to see the costs for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's that when you get that Tabor check in the mail, like you said, it's getting smaller or not coming at all, but it does maybe change people's perspectives. Um, do you think that this graduated income tax measure could pass?
I think it could. I think there's polling going on right now. I think the progressive groups, which include the Bell Policy Center, the Colorado Fiscal Institute, Colorado Law and Policy Institute, Together Colorado groups, they've been looking at this for quite some time. And I think also strategically, politically, the sense is that it's going to be a pretty big turnout in the fall and prop for the midterms, and possibly in Colorado, a pretty big anti-Trump turnout to send a message there, and that those voters would be the ones who might be likely to support a graduated income tax. There may also be, I think the legislature is debating referring a measure to, I mean, there are a couple of ideas, but one idea would be to increase education spending and take it out of the Tabor cap, which would be a complementary piece potentially to the graduated income tax if that happens. And the referred measures from the legislature, on average, maybe do a little better than the ones that come from the people because the representatives are a majority saying we think this is a good idea.
There was some news this morning that I'd love to ask you about. There's a new group of liberals called Coloradans for a Level Playing Field, and announced they're seeking a ballot measure this fall that would temporarily redistrict Colorado in the hope of sending more Democrats to Congress, but only for the next two election cycles. What do you think about this proposal?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it falls in line with the national uh, effort in Republican states to change their uh, redistricting maps. Texas, first and foremost, and maybe some others. Certainly been discussed in some other states. Florida might, Ohio, Missouri, I think, looked at it, right? And then you had the California thing, which was a kind of direct response saying, well, if and only if Texas is going to do this and change the maps, we're going to change the maps in a more favorable way for the Democrats. It's interesting in Colorado because we voted in, I want to say 2018, maybe 2020, on the ballot to have this independent redistricting commission to kind of depoliticize it. And then we added the new seat with population growth after the 2020 census. So we have the 8 seats, and right now it's 4-4, even though the Democrats are in control of everything else at the state level. The 4-4 is really comes down to one seat that's competitive or very competitive, which is the CD8, the new one north of Denver, which the Democrat won in the first election in 2022, Yadira Caravale, and then Gabe Evans beat her in the 2024 election. And they were both very close, within like 2,000, 3,000 votes. And so I think, Democrats in Colorado are kind of asking, well, if we control the governor and the legislature and all the statewide offices, why do we have a 4-4 congressional state, and why are we allowing that to happen in a national environment where Republicans are taking any chance they can in red states to try to juice their uh, numbers? And yet, because we passed it on the ballot, we can't change it for 2026 for the fall, like California is doing. And so this would have to be like 2028 and 2030. I guess the proposal is explicitly that, to just do it for those two terms and then go back to. But it's an interesting proposal. I think it depends how you feel about this nationwide
Yeah, I think looking at it from that bigger picture perspective, do you worry about like the integrity of our democracy? Like if both sides are playing tit for tat, is there a
Yeah.
point when it ends?
Yeah, no, it's a tough situation, and redistricting is so complicated. I mean, a fair map, I think in most people's minds would be, if your state is 60-40, then and you have 10 congressional seats and 6 of them ought to be, more or less likely to go to the party with the most votes, and 4 ought to go to the other. But, it's pretty easy with sophisticated map technology today to draw maps that are way out of balance, and a lot of states really are way out of balance. I would say mostly Republican red states in that category, but some blue states too. And yeah, you can draw the maps, and so I think a lot of Colorado Democrats are like, "Wow, did we handcuff ourselves in this national case with this good government-y redistricting independent commission we voted on? Nice idea, but can we afford that in a time when democracy is under threat?" Um, I think that in the integrity of the elections which is a whole related issue, right, of who's going to be allowed to vote and how hard it's going to be to vote. And I hope Colorado will maintain what I think has been a nationwide standard of excellence, in with mail-in ballots being really easy and blue books and lots of time for people to make up their minds. And, we've been either the second or third highest turnout state in the last several rounds of elections, I think, because we've made it so easy for people.
I was going to say, I feel like we take it a little bit for granted when I learned that like other states don't have anything close to the accessibility that we
Yeah, I
have.
mean, waiting online for hours and then, like, as Georgia did, literally passing a law that you can't give people water while they're waiting online is I mean, that's
Bananas.
ridiculous. I don't know how anti-voting you could be, beyond that.
So again, this would just be for 2 election cycles. So what would happen in like 2030 when the Democrats have gotten used to maybe picking 7 of Colorado's 8 members of Congress?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky question. I mean, I guess if the ballot proposal requires that we go back to the independent commission, we go back to the independent commission unless somebody changes that in the meantime, which is possible, depending on, I mean, you could have another ballot saying we're doing this forever, or we're changing the maps. I think it'll be interesting. The one CD8 seat that is certainly in play. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I mean, I think it's one of the 20 nationally out of 435 that probably could swing. Although you may have also seen the reporting that the Democrats think there's a shot at the Jeff Crank Colorado Springs seat,
Yes.
um, which maybe there is, and when and even the Jeff Hurd seat and Western Colorado, when Warren Boebert held that seat, Adam Frisch came within 500 votes a few years ago in the cycle. So, in a wave election, more than maybe one seat is competitive, but not much. It's still a stretch. I think it would have to be a pretty strong wave for those other Republican seats to be in Colorado to be threatened.
Last topic off the ballot. Let's move on to Excel and the Public Utilities Commission. I know this is one of your main areas of focus, so I'm hoping you can help me understand this a little better. I think the piece that most people are going to be thinking about are Excel's recent preemptive power shutdowns
Yeah.
to protect against wildfires. And a couple weeks ago, a bunch of angry people showed up at a PUC meeting to complain about these. What is the PUC supposed to do about it?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question for them. I mean, historically, the PUC, is a very technical body that's, experts that are appointed by the governor, and they make these generally decisions about pricing and rates, and also facilities and the transition, from a more carbon based electricity generation to more climate sensitive one. But they're very often mired in very complicated issues, and then you get this wildfire question of are we safer if we shut down power, and how angry are people when we shut down their power when maybe there isn't a problem, or the problem doesn't develop. So I think it's a really hard decision. I think PUCs are used to those kinds of technical decisions. They are a little bit insulated from politics in that they're appointed to these longer terms by the governor, and that they can't be voted out. Uh, but they certainly, no doubt, feel the political pressure from constituents that are saying they're getting a raw deal by having their power shut off. And I totally understand that. We're so dependent on flipping the switch and expecting to have all the modern conveniences available to us.
I wasn't thinking about this until I have a 4-year-old, and he's like, "Where does electricity come from?" And I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's
"Wow,
kind of
this
magic.
is a it is kind of magic." I have to be honest though, I don't know if I necessarily understood the full like what the PUC was until this particular issue came
Mm,
up. You've explained how they're appointed. Can you explain what this small border committee does?
yeah,
How does
sure.
it work, I guess?
Well, generally, historically, electricity and energy and power, and in the old days, telecommunications, were monopolies, right? There was only one provider in any geographic district. That's changed a little because people could have solar panels or home generators or heat pumps, kind of more decentralized, but still Excel in Metro Denver and other parts of the state or other providers are basically monopolies. And if you leave monopolies alone, they'll charge a high price to consumers. And people, I think, have a general sense that that's the case. And so the PUCs were set up usually about 100 years ago with the idea that they would regulate the price and wouldn't allow the monopolies to rip off consumers. And then they kind of realized that in addition to price, you have to regulate the quality and the facilities and these issues like transitions from coal to natural gas to electric and wind and solar. And so it's always been a very complicated sort of backroom operation. And I would say generally successful though, because, except for some periods of controversy or when prices are going up a lot, people kind of do take it for granted. And it mostly has worked. And, across every state has a PUC. About 10 states have elected commissioners. The others are all appointed by the governors, usually to stagger terms, and sometimes they have to appoint a set of Democrats and Republicans that isn't only one party. So it's meant to be this kind of neutral expertise oriented body, and it's generally is that. And then again, most of the time the public doesn't know about them, doesn't care about them, doesn't need to know. But then you get these controversies, maybe closing a power plant or shutting off power to avoid uh, a potential wind, a wildfire that become controversial. And then suddenly people are like, oh, what is this body? And so I think there's about 120 staff at the PUC who are economists, engineers, auditors, accountants who make sure that Excel and the other companies are, spending the money in the right ways. And I think it was established in Colorado in something like 1913. So it's a pretty 100 years of this body being around and doing, again, I think mostly successful work that is works best when you don't even know it's happening, maybe.
So I'm a consumer. My power bill goes up. Is that should I be looking at the PUC or is that Excel's fault?
Yeah, it's kind of both. I mean, the PUC, their trade-off is they don't want consumer rates to go up too much, but if they don't allow Excel to earn a reasonable profit, Excel will stop investing in the future of the electric grid, and that would not be a successful thing in the long term. So it's a real balancing act, I think, of making sure that prices stay reasonable and affordable, but also that the company, as a private firm, can at least make a decent profit. Hopefully, not in excess profits. Another new wrinkle, and has been these AI data centers, right, which take up an enormous amount of electricity. And a question there has been, are we going to let them? What price are they going to get charged for their electricity, and is that going to somehow take power away from the rest of us in a time when there might be some shortages or not enough generating capacity? And so the PUCs are struggling with that. There should be ways to manage that, though, and maybe it does mean charging them a little higher rate than they charge residential consumers to pay for the upgrades to the grid that would be needed to serve them.
Yeah, I think that's so relevant in Denver in particular. I mean, a lot of communities right now, but we're seeing one being built in Globeville area,
Mm,
Swansea, and
right.
that component of it I hadn't even thought about. So what accountability does this regulatory body have to the consumer, people who rely on the power company, on Excel?
Yeah, I mean, I think not direct political accountability because they can't be voted out, and when they're
Right.
and most of them are not. I mean, it's pretty rare for folks to be on the PUC and then run for higher office. It's not sort of seen politically that way. It's usually more experts in environmental or energy or other kinds of policy who want to play those roles. There is some accountability through the governor who appoints them, and they do have these staggered terms. So the governor now may or may not have appointed all of. I think Polis has at this point, but so that I think if consumers constituents are concerned, they can protest at the PUC hearings, but they could also kind of work through the governor and make their concerns expressed in that kind of manner. But they don't necessarily have to, respond immediately. And maybe they shouldn't, right? Because they really do have this balance of long term and short term rates and quality of service and maintenance of service to remember. I mean, I think the wildfire, there Excel paid a fine, right, a pretty hefty fine for the Marshall Fire. They, I believe, at the time claimed no responsibility despite paying this fine, and there was some concern that the fire might have started some other way than an Excel line. But certainly they're being cautious with partly because of that, and that's sort of understandable as well.
So if there's a groundswell of opposition to this preemptive power shutdowns, like if that opposition grows, how would a change be made?
Yeah, I think the PUC would take that into account. That there are a lot of people who are annoyed by this and upset by it, and genuinely, I don't want to downplay. Genuinely, if you don't have power for several days, that's a problem in many ways. So they might rethink that balance a little bit more. But on the flip side, they're concerned about a fire, right? And obviously the damage in the Marshall Fire was pretty extensive and still a problem today. And again, that's just a hard trade off for people to make. And uh, it's always this question of the balance of political influence and feedback versus the expert opinion coming from lawyers and economists and environmentalists and safety engineers, frankly, in this case, who would worry about that.
Is there anything that you're watching in particular in these debates with the PUC as someone that really understands this body?
Well, I think it's just interesting in quotes time when that all of these issues are coming together. There's a sense nationwide as well that our electricity grid is not as modernized as it should be, and with solar and wind power, there's a lot more power moving around on the grid, and partly and storage issues, and all that is enough to deal with. But then you throw in climate change and AI data centers and wildfires and just rates, which were always the bread and butter of the PUC, and it's a lot. So I think you know I my tendency does feel like they're trying to do their best in a tough climate, uh, but they are kind of these mysterious figures who uh, probably prefer to work in the technical shadows rather than the political world. But if these issues become more to the forefront, then the politics will get more interesting. The next governor, uh, whoever that's going to be, might consider appointing people with some different perspectives or step in. The governor usually doesn't, I would say, get involved in these detailed kind of technical issues, but it's possible that they could. I think rates have definitely gone up. I think there was a proposal from Excel for almost a 10% increase, which is a lot. And I totally understand people don't like that on their bill. At the same time, if you look like Western Europe, right, with the Ukraine war and Russia, their energy, electricity costs doubled, and which is not great either. But and so maybe we can feel a little bit better off than they are with the 10% increase, but it's still not fun. That's for sure.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me. This was really interesting.
Thank you.
And now, here's my sponsored interview with Elizabeth Martinez of Compass Real Estate. Hey, Bree here with Elizabeth Martinez from Compass Real Estate. We're breaking down some great Denver neighborhoods for people who are thinking about putting down roots here. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hey, how's it going, Bree?
Good. I'm so excited to talk to you. What neighborhood are we talking about today?
We're going to dive into Sloan's Lake.
Okay, so let's start off. What is your favorite piece of history that you like to share with folks about this neighborhood?
Well, I like to explain how the lake started because it's a natural lake, not man-made. It was hit by an aquifer that then swelled up the entire area with water, which was supposed to be farmland. And then it just continued to grow from there.
That's interesting because I think there are quite a few man-made lakes here in the Denver area for sure. So folks might not have any idea that historically this is actually a lake. So let's get into the neighborhood itself a little bit. What's your favorite coffee shop? What's the best coffee shop in Sloan's Lake?
You know, Sloan's doesn't really have that many coffee shops. I can only name two, Slow High, which is on 29th, and then Rise and Shine Biscuits, which is also on 29th, closer to Sheridan. But we have some good food, mainly on the periphery. So like on Federal, we have Chili Verde, and then we have Snarf Burger, which that's the only Snarf Burger in town next to a Snarf's. But then it feeds off a lot of West Highland, Highland Square, as well as South, where Colfax is now taking off.
I'm thinking of that little strip too, because folks might be familiar with Snarf's sandwiches, but they do have a very specific burger spot. And it is the only one is right there in Sloan's Lake. And I'm also thinking about Santiago's is over there too.
Yep, on Federal.
Pure breakfast burrito person. Perfect. Let's talk about sort of Sloan's Lake itself, how it's built out. How would you describe Sloan's Lake? Does it have more of an urban or a suburban feel? Like when you're walking around the neighborhood, what's it like?
Yeah, so technically it is urban in the zoning, but it does feel more suburban. And it's because of the lake itself. It has a lot of dead ends, like how suburban neighborhoods are built literally with dead ends, but it's naturally occurring because of the lake.
I think that's a good point, too, because the lake is obviously, and the park itself is an attraction for folks across the city to come to, but that traffic doesn't necessarily end up in the neighborhood, right? It's just kind of around the lake itself.
Yep.
I do have to ask you something that I've seen in a couple real estate listings. Is the proximity to Casa Bonita a selling point?
Depends on who you ask, right? I mean, how many times can you frequent Casa Bonita? Right?
That's a fair question.
I mean, I did when I was a kid, and my older sisters would always balk at it. And then when I grew up and I realized why, I forced our neighbors to go because we were like, you have to go check it out.
You have to see it.
But yeah, how many times do you actually go? Right?
True. But I will say it's a little easier to get in than it was when they first reopened. So if you are a person like me that loves it, it's just up the road.
They can go all the time. Well, it's a huge selling point for ADUs. So we're building an ADU and we're like, hey, well, we have Casa Bonita like a mile away. So it's a drawing point for visitors.
And I do love that you brought the ADU thing up too, because that's we're talking about accessory dwelling units, which means sort of like a second property that a lot of folks are building onto their properties, which is providing even more housing in the neighborhood, which actually gets me to this next question. What is the price range for a home in Sloan's Lake?
So if we're talking about the whole range, it starts up $288. That's for a condo, a 1-bed, 1-bath condo on Federal. It's an old converted schoolhouse. But the HOAs are like $540 a month. So even though it's a low price point, you're still paying it somewhere. Then on the high end is $2.5 million. Now that gets you a house with an ADU. And then the average is more like $1 million. So if you really think, how much does it cost to get in? I usually talk in terms of entry level. So how can I get a decent house that doesn't need to be scraped or needs a ton of work because it was a rental for years? The starting point is about $650.
Okay, that's good to know too. I do like the wide range though, so folks know like there are starter condos there, but like you're the guy that wants a house on the lake, you might be seeing up above that $1 million.
Yep.
Sure, but the $650 price range is pretty comparable, I feel like, through the rest of the city. So you can get a pretty beautiful house in a really great neighborhood.
Oh, for sure.
So we talked about price point, but different neighborhoods are built for different types of communities and types of people. Like, who's attracted to the Sloan's Lake community?
Sloan's Lake attracts people that are very outdoorsy. Because first, you have the running track around the lake, which equates to about a 5K, just a little less. And then you have the ability to paddleboard on the lake itself, which if you're brave enough, like my husband, you could do that. But then the people that want proximity to the mountains, you are on the western edge of Denver. So people that want to get back to the mountains as quickly as possible definitely gravitate towards Sloan's Lake.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here again. Go to elizabethmartinez.co to learn more. We'll have a link for you in our show notes as well, so you're just a click away. Thanks for listening. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell the father of Tabor, Doug Bruce, about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See ya.